Now on BBC World News, the latest business news.
China's COVID crunch. As the virus sweeps through the world's second biggest economy, a growing number of countries impose travel restrictions. The US bans video sharing app TikTok from government devices. How much will that increase tensions with China? Welcome to World Business Report. I'm Jonathan Josephs. It's lovely to have you with us wherever in the world you're watching from. Now, as coronavirus continues to sweep across China, a growing number of countries are imposing new travel restrictions on the world's second biggest economy. Spain has followed Italy to become the second European country to do so. India, Japan and the United States are also imposing new rules. It's bad news for the aviation industry, which was hoping 2023 would be the year it finally returned to profitability after losing nearly $200 billion because of the pandemic. It could also have wider consequences for the global economy. Well, let's bring in the aviation consultant, John Strickland from JLS Consulting. John, thanks for being on the programme. Just wonder if you could give us a bit of an overview of these restrictions and the impact that they're having.
Well, these are coming in quite quickly. We're hearing almost every few hours of a new restriction in place. As you said, a number of other Asian countries have introduced restrictions on arrivals. The USA, Italy, and now Spain in Europe are talking about doing so. We should put this in context of the fact that on the one hand, pre-pandemic China travel outbound, the Chinese public traveling worldwide was the biggest market in the world in terms of the scope of travel and the value to airlines and indeed to tourism. Of course, it's been a level of zero activity because of the COVID restrictions, and we're not now talking about a sudden return. We're talking about a handful of flights at this stage, but websites that look at passenger booking patterns are already seeing a surge of interest. So governments are naturally concerned, given that we don't have great transparency on what is actually happening with COVID infection rates and numbers and indeed variants in China, that we have to be ready to handle this impact of growing travel quickly and effectively.
You talk of growing government concerns, and I just wonder, after a year where the aviation industry kind of thought it was putting this whole episode behind it in many ways, how ready is the industry to be on the front line again, really, in terms of enforcing these restrictions and making sure that they work?
I think the challenge is a very real one. The biggest difficulty we saw throughout COVID was the massive inconsistency of governments around the world. Every government was doing its own thing. We're seeing elements of that already here, where Italy's talking about swabbing arriving passengers. Others, such as the US, are demanding a negative COVID test before travel. The biggest challenge for an airline, or indeed the industry as a whole, is to have consistency around the world, because it's impossible to communicate with customers and staff if there are differences in every country. We now have much more technology. The industry body IATA, for example, worked on apps, and there are several available now which provide information. We do need to see the lessons learned from the wider COVID pandemic over the last 2 years, where we apply a consistent approach. And it is worrying that European countries are taking an individual approach right now, because that's going to cause challenges if we get into a bit of a panic spiral of activity by governments that are not able to be handled by the airlines.
John, just very briefly, in about 15 seconds, can you just tell us how much of an impact will this have on profitability for the airline industry, given it's lost $200 billion already because of the pandemic?
We can't say precisely. The positive would be if the Chinese market opens up and we can manage whatever the state of the pandemic is there. There'll be a big positive impact for those airlines who operate to and from Asia and to China in particular. It would be a real positive recovery to match what we've seen, for example, in Europe and the US over the last year, where traffic has come back strongly. So we have to look at it in that positive way, but it has to be managed carefully so we don't over panic and have this challenge in implementing checks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John Strickland, aviation consultant there. Now, let's turn to the United States, where President Joe Biden has signed into law a vast spending bill that gives approval to $1.7 trillion worth of government funding. It covers everything from medical care for military veterans to help with natural disasters and $45 billion of economic aid for Ukraine, as well as military aid there. However, it also increases tensions with China by banning the popular video sharing app TikTok, which is owned by China's ByteDance, from any US government devices. The US is concerned that Chinese government will be able to access users' data, although TikTok has repeatedly said its US user data is not kept in China. With more details, here's Mariko Oi.
Well, the ban on TikTok, which is owned by China's ByteDance, was widely expected for a while now after both chambers of US Congress passed the bill, but it has now been signed into law by President Biden. It means TikTok cannot be used on any government devices unless it's for law enforcement or research, and it really underscores the growing concern about one of the most popular apps in the US. Now, lawmakers as well as the FBI have voiced concerns that TikTok's ownership structure could make US user data vulnerable because companies based in China may be required by law to hand over user information. Now, TikTok has repeatedly said its US user data is not based in China and expressed a disappointment, but recently the company revealed that its staff accessed two journalists' data inappropriately, and that's really added to the US lawmakers' concerns. But China's state media has accused the US of hysteria, linking the ban to fears over a security threat posed by China's telecom giant Huawei. Now, the banning of TikTok on government devices could benefit rival platforms like Snap and Meta's Facebook and Instagram that all are fighting for young consumers' attention, but it could also affect its founder, Zhang Yimin, who's been an outlier, if you like, to the tech debacle that we saw this year, with his fortune rising by over $10 billion this year. With his $55 billion net worth, he's now the second richest person in China, but political pressure is clearly building in Washington, with officials reportedly mulling whether to force ByteDance to sell its US version of the app.
Mariko Oi with the latest on TikTok there. Now, global stock markets are faring pretty steadily on what is the last day of trading this year. But the MSCI Global Index, which is one of the key barometers for how global markets are doing, is set for a 20% drop this year amid the broader economic slowdown. It's a year that's been marred by the war in Ukraine and the big impact that that's had in increasing inflation all over the world. If we can see, we don't have actually the market boards here, but we wonder what's in store for next year. We can join Gervase Williams, who is head of equities at the London asset management firm Premier Miton. And Gervase, the global markets are set for their worst year since 2008, the height of the global financial crisis. I just wonder if you could explain why it's so bad and what the biggest reasons are.
Yes, I think if you look at the returns on the major stock markets over the last 12 months, what really underlines is just how expensive and high valuations were at the start of the year. As you say, the mainstream stock market in the US is down 20%, but the NASDAQ rich market is down about a third, 33%. And companies like Apple are down 30%, Amazon has halved, and Tesla's gone down by 2/3. And this isn't because they've turned out bad investments. They've just been very, very highly valued to start with. And with interest rate rises and bond valuations coming down, the valuations of all assets have come down alongside them.
And Gervase, when we look at the world's biggest economy, the US, it's not yet in recession, but the consumer spending, which is so important to the US economy, is slowing. There are growing fears this recession will come and that will have global implications. Do you think things will, as that theory goes, get worse before they get better?
Yes, I mean, we've seen interest rate rises, quite considerable interest rate rises this year, in part because the oil prices moved very high, which have now peaked out. We've also seen potentially the Chinese economy coming back on stream, which will increase the supply side. But on the other side of things, we've still got the potential long-term effect of the interest rate rises to come through. I think that will lead to a moderation of demand from the consumers, and I think it may lead to some profit margin pressure as well. So while stock markets might recover, I think companies could come under margin pressure.
So lots of pressure there. And when investors look more broadly, as you sort of pointed to, the US dollar has done pretty well this year. It's gone up a lot. And that has caused inflationary problems around the world as countries that buy commodities priced in dollars struggle, and that's led to the cost of living crisis that many of us are seeing. Do you think there are any hopes that that will get easier if these interest rate rises start to taper off a bit?
Yes, I mean, I think there may be, some opportunities for some of the commodity prices to level off. But what's interesting is if you take the latest data in terms of crude stockpiles in the US, they've been continuously falling this year, even at a time when the Chinese economy hasn't been growing rapidly. They've reached 2004 levels. So if anything, there is a risk that actually there's a headwind of a rise in energy prices in the coming year, which actually may restart some of the inflationary pressures we've had during 2022.
Brilliant. Gervais Williams from Premier Miton, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for on World Business Report. Plenty more on the website at bbc.com/business.
There's a crush now to get onto this bus before it leaves. Some of these people have been waiting here for days. They've had no food and no water.
300,000 people are living in famine conditions, with another 2 million on the brink of famine.
Just look at all this water. It's like being in the middle of the ocean, except just over there are people's houses.
Look at it. Desolation. This is what months of attritional warfare does to a town.
Republicans may be disappointed they didn't make the gains they'd hoped for, but it appears they will have the power to frustrate the president's agenda for the next 2 years.
You can see that not everybody in Taiwan is delighted by Nancy Pelosi's arrival here.
Protesters have tried to make their way into the Prime Minister's office, but as you can see, they didn't manage.
This smouldering pocket has just sprung up out of nowhere, and it's now a race to contain it.
People here are shouting, Lula has returned. Like him or loathe him, this is a historic moment for Brazil.
From France to the UK to Germany want to know they really can rely on Norway's energy supply.
More than 17 million saw Chloe Kelly's goal. Try telling them and the thousands here that no one cares about women's football.